Former US President Donald Trump is making headlines yet again, this time for being banned on Facebook. Facebook has upheld the company's suspension of Trump, while its oversight board says that the company was wrong to make the suspension indefinite. Welcome to WION World is One. I'm Priyanka Sharma, and today on our special weekly broadcast of the WION-VOA co-production, we will be tackling Trump's Facebook ban and other stories coming in from America. So let's begin. Facebook's oversight board on Wednesday upheld the social media company's decision to ban former US President Donald Trump from posting comments to his Facebook and Instagram accounts, a measure imposed after he posted incendiary remarks as hundreds of his supporters stormed the US Capitol on January 6th. The quasi-independent panel left open the possibility that Trump could eventually return to the popular website and gave Facebook executives 6 months to re-examine, and I quote, the arbitrary penalty that it imposed day after the insurrection. The decision sends a signal to world leaders everywhere that to use social media, they have to play by a set of rules that are still forming. VOA's Tina Trin has more on this next report. Take a look.
For world leaders and other VIPs who use Facebook and social media, the recent decision by the quasi-independent Facebook Oversight Board about former President Donald Trump is supposed to send a message.
The same rules that apply to all Facebook users should also apply to influential users. Influential users should not be judged against a separate set of rules.
But the decision raises more questions about what exactly those rules are and what it means for world leaders who want to get their message out, putting a harsh spotlight again on text power over online speech.
We will never give up.
This week, the board, made up of journalists, activists, and lawyers, said that the social networking giant made the right call when it suspended Trump after the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol in January, but erred in making the ban indefinite. The board gave Facebook 6 months to make a final decision on Trump's account. Facebook said it would carefully review the board's recommendations.
Facebook had sort of punted the decision to the oversight board, putting Trump in an indefinite suspension and kind of leaving it to the oversight board to make the final call. But the oversight board is punting right back to Facebook and saying, no, this is on you. You need to clarify your policies and then decide whether this man meets them or not.
The board wrestled with the complex interplay between free speech and protecting people, said Emma Alonso.
In international human rights law, there is strong protection for freedom of expression for everyone, but there's also a recognition that some kinds of speech can actually lead to real-world violence.
There's been mixed reaction to the decision, with conservative lawmakers in the U.S. criticizing Facebook for keeping Trump off, and others saying he should have been permanently banned. Trump didn't address the decision, but criticized technology companies on his new site Wednesday. One thing that should change, the board said, is making exceptions for world leaders, whose postings, no matter how inaccurate or controversial, are deemed newsworthy because of their political standing.
This idea of a newsworthiness allowance, that things may be justified to be said on Facebook because they're newsworthy. We're saying if there's ever a balance, it has to be towards keeping people safe.
The vast majority of politicians in this world don't need these exceptions because they are not trying to undermine democracy, or they are not trying to demonize entire communities.
The board's decision is a step closer to creating stronger rules, important especially when Facebook is operating in places with fragile democracies, said Wendy Vi.
They need to take a careful look at those policy recommendations because civil society and our own organization has been saying the exact same thing for so long, and it has been ignored, with the result being death and damage to democracies. They have their values, they need to live up to them.
Now that the ball is back in Facebook's court, political leaders, influential people, and its 2.8 billion users worldwide will have to wait and see if the social network makes changes. Tina Trin, VOA News.
For a better understanding of Facebook's ban and its implications, we have Voice of America's Amy Hibbles joining us live on the show from Washington. Amy, welcome to WION World is One. Help us understand the background of this suspension. While the announcement, of course, has received coverage not only in the United States but worldwide, walk us through the events that led up to this decision to ban former U.S. President Donald Trump from Facebook.
Well, sure. This basically goes back to the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th that left 5 people dead. What happened this week is the Oversight Board basically agreed with Facebook that 2 of Trump's posts back on January 6th violated their standards. Then they decided to suspend them. They suspended him, both of his accounts on Instagram and on Facebook back on January 6th. Now, Trump reacted strongly to this week's decision, saying free speech has been taken away from the President of the United States. He also called the actions taken by Facebook, Twitter, and Google, quote, a total disgrace and embarrassment to our country.
Right. Now, Amy, another very important aspect of this decision, of course, we know that the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of expression and protects the rights to free speech. So do those rights not apply to the former U.S. president?
Right. Well, that question actually came up back in January when Facebook and Instagram decided to suspend the acting president at that time. They decided to suspend both of his accounts. So the Congressional Research Service actually put together a report for lawmakers informing them that free speech protections set out in the First Amendment apply to when a person is harmed by an action of the government. So the First Amendment doesn't really apply to the private sector, which includes social media companies like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Despite that, this decision by Facebook in the weeks to come is obviously going to be closely watched, not only here in the U.S., but I'm sure by leaders worldwide, as the implications it will have for the tech industry.
Right, absolutely. As you just said, WION will also continue to track the updates in this news development. Thanks for these inputs, Amy. Please stay with us on this broadcast. We'd like you to give your perspective on another important story coming from America. Now, pro-Trump protesters in the Capitol, as we just heard, our VOA correspondents say, had stormed the U.S. Capitol, which is why Facebook led to the banning of Donald Trump recently. Moving on to another important story, as the number of COVID-19 cases in India rise and overwhelm the healthcare system, many from the country now living in the U.S. have watched helplessly as friends and family grapple with the coronavirus. Now, as VOA's Kane Faribault reports, some in the Midwest state of Illinois are mobilizing to help from afar. Take a look.
Every morning, just checking the internet for the latest news from India is a dismal ritual for entrepreneur Anil Joshi.
In my own family, my cousin family actually have 4 people, all 4 family members got infected. A childhood friend of mine died actually.
In recent weeks, 7 members of Ashfaq Syed's extended family in the Indian city of Hyderabad have contracted the virus. He says all 7 have since passed away.
It is going crazy, I can say, and I have been getting messages every day of somebody passing away, especially from my family and friends and loved ones.
Anil Joshi's company, IntelliH, is developing technology that would allow India's medical professionals to remotely assess and monitor patients. He has a team of 35 employees in India advancing the project, but the virus is slowing down their work.
In our own group, in the last 3 weeks, we have 4 people who are actually infected and not able to work because their mom or dad got them first, and obviously Indian families are very closely knit family. They live together.
Joshi and Syed are among many trying to answer India's call for help.
People need oxygen supply there. People need medicines like remdesivir and others.
We need ventilators because some of my friends requested us to arrange some ventilators, donations and all those things.
While there are logistical challenges in collecting and shipping equipment to India, Syed says sending money has provided immediate assistance.
Oxygen, the ox cylinder, it used to be 2,000 Indian rupees earlier. Now it has shoot up to 20,000, 30,000. So because of, shortage of oxygen. So we need to arrange some funds.
South Asian communities throughout Illinois are joining the effort.
Can I have your name, please?
Sajjad Bhatti is from India's neighboring country of Pakistan. He runs a restaurant in the Chicago suburb of Naperville and has barely survived the financial hardship created by COVID lockdowns in the U.S. While his own family in Pakistan is healthy and, so far, safe from the virus, his heart goes out to those in India who are suffering.
It doesn't matter, they're Muslim, Hindu, whatever, they are praying for all of India. In our mosque, in our churches, everywhere they're praying for India.
Even though his business hasn't returned to normal, Bhatti is helping Syed raise about $10,000 to buy medical supplies in India. He sees it as a goodwill gesture between peoples of two estranged nations.
Anybody in India, they're their brothers too. It is the biggest opportunity, and we hope we're going to build a bridge and everything will calm down in our region.
Outreach that is needed in India, where COVID-19 is taking a horrific toll. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Naperville, Illinois.
Now, for more updates, Voice of America's correspondent Amy Hibbles is still with us from Washington, D.C. Amy, thanks so much for staying with us on WION. Now, we just saw an example of efforts in the Midwest to try and help people back in India who are struggling in the midst of the pandemic and a second deadly wave right now. What's the reaction been in your region?
Well, the surge is being closely followed right here by those in the Indian American community. VOA spoke with residents in the nearby state of Virginia this week to see how they feel about what's unfolding on the ground in India. One woman who was interviewed described the situation as heartbreaking. Keep in mind, there are more than 4 million people of Indian descent here in the United States. Some of them have started to speak out about the need for the U.S. government to play a much larger role in helping its neighbors. One of those individuals is Ashish Jha. He is the dean of the Brown University School of Public Health. He wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post recently in which he described the unique position that the United States is in to help the world's largest democracy. Then, of course, there are the individual efforts like what you just saw in that package there about what's going on in the Midwestern state of Illinois, what they're doing to mobilize to try to help out people. And yesterday I spoke with an individual right here in Virginia, Shashank Sharma. He's from New Delhi. He's launched a GoFundMe page, and he tells me he's trying to raise money to send oxygen concentrators and other medical equipment to those in need in India. So obviously with social media and WhatsApp and the 24-hour news cycle, people here in the U.S. are very aware and very concerned about what's unfolding in India.
Right, Amy, since you just mentioned that there are growing calls for the U.S. government to do more to step in since it is in a position. There was also a major development this week from the Biden administration with respect to sharing vaccine technology. Tell us more about this.
Right, a major policy shift. This week, on Wednesday, the Biden administration said that it would support a patent vaccine waiver at the WTO. That's a departure from its position that it's held in the past. Obviously, there are a lot of large pharmaceutical companies here in the United States. Now, the U.S. is the first country in the developed world with a major vaccine manufacturing industry to take this stand in regards to waivers. Now, this doesn't mean that the patents are suddenly going to be lifted. In fact, even today, the German government has spoken out against the U.S. proposal. What has to happen is all 164 members of the WTO have to vote in agreement. They have to vote unanimously to lift this restrictions. But it's an issue that's pressing right now, especially with what we see unfolding in India. And keep in mind, the Biden administration made this decision set against the background of criticism for their slow response to what's happening in India.
Right, absolutely. Thanks so much, Amy, for all your insights into these news developments in America. Thanks for joining us on the show today. Let's now bring you some more stories from America. The Pentagon has ramped up its military assets in the Middle East as the U.S. and NATO coalition forces begin the colossal task of withdrawing from Afghanistan. Top U.S. defense officials say that Afghans will face significant challenges in keeping the Taliban at bay without the U.S. troops. Our next report by Voice of America brings you more details. Take a look.
The U.S. military has closed one base in Afghanistan and pulled out enough weapons and equipment to fill about 60 of these C-17 cargo planes.
Less than 1 week in, the drawdown is going according to plan.
Speaking Thursday at their first joint briefing, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley vowed to continue aiding the Afghan military with funding and support from bases outside Afghanistan. But the leaders acknowledged big challenges looming soon, including how U.S. forces will continue to train and advise their Afghan partners.
We'll also continue to take a look at training them in perhaps other locations. We don't know. We haven't figured that out 100% yet. But also things like maintenance support and perhaps CT support from over the horizon.
The U.S. is leaving Afghanistan after nearly 20 years of war.
What we have tried for many years, which is to defeat the Taliban militarily, has not worked. And we are stalemated on the security front. We are stalemated at Doha. And sometimes it feels like we're stalemated within the Afghan government in terms of building a coherent Afghan political set inside Kabul.
And as the U.S. pulls out, Milley says Afghan forces haven't crumbled under the increased pressure.
It's not a foregone conclusion, in my professional military estimate, that the Taliban automatically win and Kabul falls or any of those kind of dire predictions. That's not a foregone conclusion.
The U.S. military says Afghanistan has seen 80 to 120 enemy-initiated attacks each day for the past year. That pace, along with stalled peace talks, points to a rough road ahead. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
Moving on to some other global stories now. Residents of Dawe in southern Myanmar's Tanintharyi region have turned out in thousands for near-daily marches against the military regime. This Myanmar city is a hotbed for anti-coup protests. It is also the coup leader's hometown. Voice of America brings you more details in this next report.
The city of Dawe has been a hotbed for anti-coup protests since Myanmar's military seized power on February the 3rd. Residents of Dawe in southern Myanmar's Tanintharyi region have turned out by the thousands for near-daily marches against the military regime. The ironic part, the coup leader, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, is a native son of Dawe. However, he seems to have little support in his hometown. Close ties to the coup leader have not spared Dawe. 11 of its residents have been killed, and more than 100 have been arrested in a brutal crackdown on anti-coup protests. The death toll nationwide is now more than 750.
Britain sent 2 warships to the English Channel on Thursday amid a dispute with France about fishing rights. French fishermen say that they are being illegally prevented from fishing in the waters around the island of Jersey. Although both the countries have now withdrawn their vessels from the island, a permanent solution to resolve the crisis is still awaited. Our next report by Voice of America will bring you more details. Take a look.
About 24 French trawlers sailed to Jersey to stage a protest Thursday. One vessel briefly entered the main harbour on the island.
We come today because we have always fished in the waters there. We have always fished here. And then overnight, they take away all our fishing rights.
Britain dispatched 2 warships to Jersey to monitor the situation. The ships returned to port after the French protest finished late Thursday, and the British government said it remains on standby. France also deployed 2 maritime patrol vessels to the area. Talks between the fishermen and Jersey authorities failed to come up with a solution. Jersey is British, but lies just off the French mainland. Under Britain's exit deal from the European Union, special provisions were included for the island's fishing grounds.
French boats that were catching fish in Jersey waters for at least 10 days a year between 2017 and 2020 have the right to continue doing so on into the future. What it seems has happened is that the Jersey authorities have taken a very restrictive approach to proving that you were fishing and how much you were fishing in the last 3 years.
France has threatened to cut off Jersey's electricity supply.
We are ready to use these retaliatory measures. Europe, France, has the means. It's written into the agreement. So as far as Jersey is concerned, I would remind you, for example, of the transport of electricity by submarine cables.
The British government said it would seek a solution.
To work together to make sure that operationally, on the ground, we iron out any issues, any problems, so that this historic deal between the United Kingdom and the EU, one of the most important deals we have struck, we've put in place, works for people, for communities, for the fishing communities.
Fishing makes up a fraction of 1% of British and European economies, but fishing is a potent cultural and political force, says Kane.
Fishermen are, after all, in a modern economy, they're the only people who are still basically hunter-gatherers. They go out and find food and bring it back. And so there's that kind of primal dimension to fishing that maybe makes it a bit sensitive. In addition to that, it's deeply rooted in coastal communities. People seem to care very much about it to a degree that is wildly disproportionate to its economic importance. And then politically as well, it's quite frankly useful for both sides to be pushing this story because it has so much resonance.
The European Union has called for a de-escalation of the dispute, but analysts say tensions over fishing likely will continue as Britain seeks to fulfil its Brexit promise to take back control. Henry Richwell for VOA News, London.
And that's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching with me, Priyanka Sharma. Stay tuned to WION World as One Global News continues on the other side.